The Fuji XE1 and XPro1 look very similar. They're stylish and cool, but how do they perform in terms of functionality, and how do they compare? Their small size makes them really excellent for travel photography. They're inconspicuous for street photography, and less threatening for portrait photography.
Hi, this is Ben from EnglishPhotographer.com. I'm in Barcelona in the Plaza San Felipe area, and I'm going to be comparing the XPro1 from Fujifilm with the XE1 from Fujifilm. Now, the XPro1 came out first, and 9 months later, the XE1 came out. It's got the exact same X-trans sensor, which is an amazing sensor. It's got a sort of different pattern than the normal Bayer array that allows it to have better image quality at high ISOs. Doesn't need the anti-aliasing filter because it doesn't really have any moire, and therefore you get sharper photographs with great colours, great Fuji colours as usual. And they both share the same sensor and therefore exactly the same image quality. I've got the same lens on both, the f2.8 to 4 18 to 55, both the same lens, both the same image quality. So why would I pay more for this one instead of its newer, cheaper sister, the XE or sexy one? Well, this one has got the hybrid viewfinder, which has also got the optical as well as the electronic. That means in practice that I can use this one where there's extreme high contrast. I can actually look through this. It's not a rangefinder, but it does give me a sort of an overlay electronically of the aperture, the shutter speed, the exposure compensation. It's quite useful. This one, apart from that, has also got the PC sync for the flash, and it's got a button on here to lock the shutter speed. But apart from that, very, very similar cameras. And in balance, the EVF, the electronic viewfinder from this one is actually upgraded. It's the Sony RX1, Sony A99 one. And I actually prefer using the XE1 because it's smaller and lighter. This is still very small and light, but this one's just that little bit better. And with the same image quality and a smaller package, I prefer the XE1. Let's go and find out why.
So let's compare them. The XPro1 is on top of the XE1, and apart from the colour, they're almost identical. The controls are laid out in a similar way, and here you can see the main difference between them: the electronic viewfinder and the hybrid viewfinder in the XPro1.
I haven't used electronic viewfinders before, but I'm finding they're really useful. On an LCD screen on a normal digital camera, it'd be very difficult to see the photographs, especially in bright light, whereas here, I can just bring the camera up to my eye on both cameras, and the eye sensor will automatically switch the electronic viewfinder on and allow me to review the photographs. Check for sharpness, check for exposure, check for colours. Even in dark photographs, which on an LCD screen, I'd have to judge by the histogram normally. Very useful feature.
Here's a street photograph I took using the EVF, the electronic viewfinder.
I'm going to take a photograph now from the floor, and to do so I've got to have the cameras very low. But these cameras have got the fixed LCD. That's probably more durable, but I actually prefer to have the amateur or prosumer tiltable LCD. They're very, very useful in this situation. I could be composing it like this. As it is, I'm having to lie on the ground or take a photograph and have a look. So these cameras, both of them, the XE1 and the XPro1, don't have the tiltable LCD, but it would be a useful option.
And here's how the photograph turned out.
I've been using manual exposure mode for most of the photographs on these cameras because it's so easy to do. You've got the shutter speed dial on the top on both. It's metal, it's very precise, and it's not going to slip. On the XPro1, the shutter speed dial is slightly different in that it will go all the way around until you come to the A, which is automatic, and then you have to press a little button, and then that unlocks it and allows you to go around again. The XE1 has stops on either end for the bulb mode and then the A for the automatic mode. The aperture is controlled by a dial on the lens. On the 18 to 55mm zoom lens, this is actually electronic and just goes all the way around like a focusing thing on a normal camera. The aperture on the lens is very smoothly controlled by this dial. It feels very precise, very easy to do, and the shutter speed dial is a lot more firm, more difficult to judge certainly what you're actually going to be doing. The exposure compensation is controlled by the thumb of both cameras. It is excellent, really useful feature and very well made. Both cameras, while not precisely the same, have pretty much the same menu system and button control. The buttons, while not identical, are very similar and laid out in the same way. So I've got the FN button here close to my index finger next to the shutter button. The on-off switch is very easy to use, just like a click, and each shutter button has actually got the standard cable release built into it, which is useful. They've got the exposure compensation here with the thumb, and generally the buttons are laid out in the same way. Not quite identical, but pretty much. This allows you to have a couple of cameras, one XPro1 and one XE1, and then not get confused when you go between the two. Useful feature. The menus are well laid out, and they're very easy to navigate.
Practically, this is good for street photography, because you don't have to go into loads of menus to select your options, and also for portraits.
Both cameras are exceptional at high ISO sensitivities, and I wouldn't hesitate to use something like 3200, maybe even 6400. But also, they have a flat bottom, so they will stay still. So I can actually use a lot of things as a natural tripod. For example, here, when I'm going to take a photograph inside the church, the light levels are very low, and therefore I can just use this and make sure that the camera is steady, and then use the self-timer, which is 2 seconds, through the Q menu, the quick menu. Either camera allows me to get very good results in low light.
I use Fuji's RAW converter, Silky Pix, to convert this.
The dynamic range of the X-Trans sensor is already very good, but each camera also offers a extended dynamic range option. This is from 100, 200% and 400%. However, I think it's some sort of thing to do with the sensitivity, because the dynamic range of 200% only becomes available at about 400 ISO, and 400% becomes available at about 800 ISO. And therefore I think that the camera is actually underexposing and then bringing up the rest of the shadows using the image processing. And therefore you can use those dynamic processing modes to create higher dynamic range in scenes where you're using an ISO of maybe 400 or 800.
Here's an HDR image of the church.
As well as the dynamic range option from 100%, 200% and 400% using the higher ISOs, there's also a dynamic range bracketing option. That's also very useful. So if I use that now, it's in the drive mode. It's available on both cameras. And when I take the photograph of this high contrast scene, it actually takes 3 different photographs, differently exposed. And again, a different option.
We're now in the train station, the Estación de Francia.
The dynamic range bracketing is good, but I actually prefer more stops with the auto exposure bracketing. At the moment it's only plus or minus 1, and some cameras will go to plus or minus 3 or even 4 or 5 stops. The range of HDR images available now, especially now that the software is so good, mean that an auto exposure bracketing covering a range of stops is pretty essential. There's also the 35mm prime lens, which I've got on now. It's got a maximum aperture of 1.4 and the optics are superb. It's very sharp and the colours are excellent. It gives me the ability to photograph just this fountain and throughout the background with a very pleasing bokeh.
Nice shutter too.
Both cameras have got movie modes, but you get the sense they've just been included for the marketing guys so they can say they've got them. It's 1080, so full HD at 24p, 24 frames a second. That's the minimum you can actually get away with and still get the illusion of motion, which is why the filmmakers chose it in the first place. It's nothing to compare with something like a Sony, but it's good in a pinch. The Fuji XE1 has got a microphone socket, but it's proprietary. It's not the standard XLR, certainly not, but certainly not the 3.5mm either, which you're generally going to find. The XPro1 has actually not got a microphone input at all. I can record to an external audio recorder and sync them later, but either camera is not really set up for movie making. Okay, so let's suppose we're in a dark bar. Well, we are, and we want to take a photograph of this necklace here. Now, to do so, we can use a higher ISO, that's fine. But what we could also do is use the flash. With the XE1, you have the built-in flash with a guide number of 7. It's not very powerful, and it's so small the light's going to be very hard, and it's actually blocked by the lens. However, it's useful to trigger slave flashes. The XPro1 doesn't have a built-in flash, so it has got the standard hot shoe, and the PC sync here for other flashes, which the XE1 lacks. I prefer the XE1 in this situation because a flash is better than no flash, and what I've used is actually tilting this up a bit and a white saucer. So I'm actually bouncing the flash into the white saucer, and that's giving a nice even light. Like so.
You can tell I was quite proud of my saucer idea. Okay, the next bit is a bit windy outside, so apologies for this. Ready?
Fuji are very well known for their great colours, and these cameras are no exception. You have a standard option, you have Velvia, which is incredibly saturated and a fairly high contrast. You have the Pro Neg High and the Pro Neg Standard, and also Astia, which is the standard soft, very low contrast, more less saturated colour option. These are film modes within the camera that actually allows you to use it almost as a JPEG machine without all the post-processing and still get great results. I found this green wall. I'm going to look for a red dressed somebody, volunteer, and hopefully get some really nice photographs to show you those different film modes.
So the first film option is the Provia, or standard. Then comes Velvia, which is more saturated, especially in the reds. A little bit more contrast too. Finally Astia, which is more subdued. Lovely colours here. And we're just saying goodbye to our very kind volunteer. Again Provia, Velvia, stronger blues, and Astia. No polarizer in either of these. Strange. Never understood these things.
So I've just found a photograph here with the church and lit by the direct light, and in the shadows with the Barcelona street light here. A very beautiful photograph. So I'm just going to take it with either of the cameras. I'm going to choose the XE1, and I'm going to set the exposure manually for the sunlight. So that's, as always, 250 at f8. This camera's base ISO is 200, and therefore I'm going to bring it up to f11. So 250 of a second, shutter speed, and the aperture is f11. So I'm just setting that now to 50, and then the ISO to 200. And then it's just point and shoot. It takes a while for both of the cameras to actually write the photographs because I'm shooting in RAW and JPEG, which means that there's very large files to actually process. But it's done now. I've taken 2 photographs, and this is the finished photograph.
So again, no polarizer for these dark blue skies, just the Fuji colours. I think it was Velvia. We're now in a different location, prowling around looking for photographs. Oh, there's one, and boom, afternoon light with the shadows. One of the great things about the Fuji cameras is they just free you up to go and explore and observe and shoot, so you don't have to go out with a specific thing in mind. You're just carrying a camera and it's small enough to forget it, and then when a photograph strikes you, you just bring it out. It's very intuitive to use, and it's just boom, line the shot up, and that's it. Very simple to use. Here's the finished photograph, again with lovely Fuji colours. So we're just approaching this chap here for a portrait, to which he's very kindly agreed. And we just lined it up, step back a bit for the perspective, and there's the photograph. So that's it. We've compared the XE1 and the XPro1. I think in balance the XE1 is probably a better bet, because it's a little bit cheaper, a little bit smaller, it's got the built-in flash, and the hybrid viewfinder on the XPro1, good as it is, and it is useful, isn't that amazing that you've got to get it over the XE1. The XE1's upgraded electronic viewfinder from the Sony cameras really is superb. It's been a pleasure to use it. And I think in balance both of the Fujis are very capable, but I would go with the XE1, the sexy one. The main thing for me was just the sheer pleasure of actually photographing with these cameras. It makes it very intuitive and enjoyable. They're light enough to carry everywhere, whereas the Pro DSLRs from the likes of Nikon and Canon, they're just a bit too big to carry every day. These are, and they give you the same great image quality, with lovely Fuji colours. This is just a snapshot on the beach, and again, quite a high ISO and perfectly clean. And thanks to our filmmaker, Hiromi from hiromitories.com. If you'd like to invest in a microphone for her, we'd be very happy. Just send an email to ben@englishphotographer.com. Thanks for your comments and your subscriptions.